Good afternoon from Beantown, that's Boston. I'm Dennis Wirth with Funny Like a Clown podcast. I am your host with the most. I'm actually outside of Boston, a little town named Gardner. We call it G Vegas. You guys know that. But rainy day here in G Vegas, but that's a good day to do a podcast because we can stay away from the rain. This is episode 29, June 16th, 2019. Father's Day weekend. Happy Father's Day to any fathers out there. We are here to discuss comedian Jackie Gleason. And as always, Funny Like a Clown is brought to you by G Vegas Buffalo Sauce. For the spicy, sweet, savory taste of game time, there's only one G Vegas. And to discuss Jackie Gleason, I have on the phone Robert Glancy, better known as Big Bob. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Hey, how you doing, Dennis?
Doing pretty good. How's life in Maine?
It's really good. We got a little rain here, too.
All right. They don't call you a maniac up there or anything, do they?
We're all maniacs up there.
They call you whatever they want, right? But what makes you a
go.
Jackie Gleason fan?
Yeah. From the beginning, my dad loved him, and he was just, back then there wasn't a lot on TV, and the Jackie Gleason show was something we watched all the time, so.
All right, so was it with your family, with your dad that you watched him, yeah?
Oh, yeah, my dad loved him.
Now, he's one of the few guys where you can say, you know, a lot of people had big roles, memorable roles, but this guy had iconic roles, just some of the stuff he did. But do you have a favorite memory of his, whether it's comedy or TV or movies?
I used to like Jim Taylor dances on his Jackie Gleason show. That and Frank Fontaine doing the bartender there.
The bartender, one of his characters, yeah, okay, so...
Yeah.
So let's say he lived from 1916 to 1987. He was an American comedian, actor, writer, composer, and conductor. He developed his style from growing up in Brooklyn. Now, you're a New York guy too, right?
Yeah, I was born in Queens.
Queens, okay. Queens, Brooklyn, that's the same thing. So something down in the water and down there pushing out funny guys or what?
What's that again?
Is there something in the water that's kicking out funny guys down there in New York?
Yeah, New York has this funny guys.
Sure, I mean, big population, so chance somebody funny's going to come out of there. He's best known for playing the bus driver Ralph Cramden in the television series The Honeymooners. Now, what do you remember about watching The Honeymooners with your dad?
Yeah, I remember,
Well, you're cutting in and out. You remember what again?
he was to the moon now.
To the moon, right to the moon. I remember he put up his fist, which, you know, for back then, it wasn't a thing. Can you imagine doing that on TV today? You'd have women's activist groups, and everybody go nuts if you did that today, wouldn't they?
There's a lot of things that we used to do they wouldn't put up with today.
Everybody's offended by something.
For one thing, he was a bus driver, but Carney was a sewer worker.
Yeah, they just had regular jobs on the show. It wasn't nothing fancy, right?
Yeah, that's the one who I don't know what he did, or whatever. He was like Joe working class guy, and he really was.
Oh, yeah, just a blue-collar guy, right, yeah. That was the genius of the show, because the blue-collar people could relate to him, where if he played some, you know, high-class guy like he was, you probably wouldn't have been able to relate to him as much.
Yeah.
Now, they say the genius of the show, now this was before his time, now this was before VHS's even, I mean, when he filmed this stuff, it was back in the day, and by filming with electrocams, okay, which was state-of-the-art for the time, it actually saved the Honeymooners footage to a higher quality, and he was later to release it in syndication, and that brought a whole new, you know, 10 years after the Honeymooners, in syndication, it brought in a whole new audience for him. And he was one of the few people at the time that thought about doing that.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and I remember the show Star Trek. When Star Trek first came out, it wasn't that big of a hit, but it became such a legendary series in syndication when they re-aired it. It became bigger than it ever did when it first came out, you know?
Yeah.
So, hey, he was...
One thing I like about Jackie, and part of why I picked him was, he got his start doing stand-up.
Yeah, oh, sure.
He was actually like a guy he was like, not a janitor, but he kept a bar in Newark, New Jersey. And he was the guy who kept it clean, you know what I mean? And he actually slept in the back room with the empty beer bottles. That's where he lived.
Oh, well, a A lot of comics now, they sleep in their cars and shower at the gym. Yeah, that's what it takes to make it. I mean,
well, he was doing his show, the bartender pit, actually at the bar, and the guy that owned the club liked it so much that he let him on the microphone, and that's where he got his start. You know what I mean?
you never know when opportunity's going to rise. You know, you're in little bars like that, and something happens, and one thing leads to another. But
yeah. You know something else? He was in his day. He was like the guy. You know what I mean? His title for himself was the greatest, but.
Oh, sure. He was iconic, yeah. I mean.
Yeah, well, he like, you know, one of the things he did, Frank Sinatra, his favorite drink was Jack Daniels, you know what I mean? Well, Jackie Gleason was the one who turned him on to it for the first time, so.
Really?
You know.
Yeah, he rubbed elbows with all the big names back then. Frank Sinatra, Johnny Carson, but, let's see, Jackie Gleason, he maintained his high ratings with the Jackie Gleason Show that aired from 1950s to the 1970s. That's over 20 years of a talk show that he had. That originated in New York, and then he moved the show to Miami Beach, Florida in 1964 after he took up permanent residence there. Do you remember anything about the Jackie Gleason Show?
Oh, yeah. First of all, he had like a 42 rating, which means that 42% of all the people that had TV were watching him when he was on the air.
42% of America watching his show. Wow.
Yeah, that was like live TV back then.
I mean, from the 50s to the 70s, that's 20 years on TV, too. Can you imagine staying in the ratings for 20 years?
Yeah.
How many shows can, I mean, Happy Days maybe I can think of? How many shows can lay claim to that?
Top of the charts, too. I mean, like, when he would go down to like a 29 rating, which is not bad by today's standards at all, he would be disappointed and talk about, you know, like not doing it anymore.
Right. When you're at the top, you don't like to go average. You got to stay at the top. You got to stay there.
Yeah, and I remember, like, you know, I mentioned it earlier, two Taylor dancers, but that was a big deal. They used to do, like, kaleidoscope stuff on the show, you know, where the girls would all, it would look like a kaleidoscope, what you were looking at, there was just the dancers with a backdrop doing stuff with their legs and their arms and stuff, and with the outfits that they had on. And June Taylor was his sister-in-law.
Really? Really?
Yeah.
Well, it was before his time. He was so before his time on a lot of stuff, you know. But
well, when he moved down to Florida was not like Miami. Was not like the big place it is today. He's the one. By him moving there, he kind of made it the big place.
He made it the big place, right? Yeah. Everybody goes there once he goes there, but. Among his notable roles, and I remember this one was iconic, was Minnesota Fats in the 1961 movie The Hustler, co-starring Paul Newman. What do you remember about that?
I remember that movie. I saw that in the theaters, and yeah, it was because Minnesota Fats was big back then too, and he actually shot all his own shots in the game. They both actually played pool against.
Yeah, he was actually, before he became famous, he actually hustled pool on the streets of New York for a little bit to make a living, and he said he drew on that experience to play the role.
Well, like I was saying about what before he got discovered, when he was sleeping in that back room of that bar, across the street was a pool hall, that after he got done work, that's where he would go and hustle pool.
Hang out at the pool, yeah. I mean, it was such an iconic movie. Years later, they did a remake of it, The Color of Money, with Tom Cruise and Paul Newman, and Paul Newman reoccurred his role.
Right.
But I mean,
the original one was actually what I remember about it was Fast Eddie Felton, who actually played Minnesota Fats in real life.
Yeah.
Was complaining that something about Minnesota Fats, and they were drinking. He says, and I got drunk, but. What Minnesota Fats said him, and what Jackie Gleason said in defense of Minnesota Fats was, you know, Minnesota Fats was drinking right along with Fats Eddie. They were both drinking, so it wasn't like one was drunker than the other.
Right. They both played at the same drunken level. That was a big thing back then. I mean, you shot pool, you drank. That was the nightlife.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Drinking back then was different than it is today. I know my dad was in the Marines, and if he drank like that now in the Marines, they'd kick him out. You know what I mean? But back then, it was almost like part of the job.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays the kids are more into the drugs. It's the pot and the cocaine and whatever, the ecstasy. But back then, men drank, and that was how you dealt with the toughness of life, you know.
Well, that's what my dad said, because I stepped on the dark side a little bit as a teenager. And my dad told me that they didn't have it when he was a kid. Because he was a troublemaker too, and he probably would have done it if they had it. But they just didn't
Sure.
have it, you know?
But I mean, it was just such an iconic role. They said nobody could have pulled off Minnesota Fast the way Jackie Gleason did. He was so remembered for that role, how good of a job he did with it, you know?
Well, at one point he actually lost some weight because for his health. He lost like 100 pounds, and everybody says, you're not funny, skinny.
Yeah, if you're known for the big guy, that's what they want. That's what they remember you for, sure. But go on to another iconic role. Do you remember him as Buford T. Justice in the Smokey and the Bandit series?
That's what most people don't remember him.
Right, it ran from 1977 to the early 80s, starring Burt Reynolds. And what do you remember about him from that?
Buford T. Justice. He played the police officer chasing him.
Right.
And, yeah, he was great in that role too.
That was iconic too, because everybody. Do you remember "you some bitch"? That everybody was saying that it was the catchphrase. You know, I'm gonna get you some bitch.
Oh yeah.
But just another iconic role where, I mean, just playing with these Paul Newman, Burt Reynolds, just the legends of our time, and he was the guy anchoring, the show right there with them, to be remembered for. But who don't remember Buford T. Justice? I don't know.
I remember he was always frustrated because he could never catch a bandit.
That's right. You never catch the bandit. That was the legendary car series of our time. Well, the Dukes of Hazzard was hot with the General Lee, and then it was hot with the Black Trans Am. Everybody wanted. I mean, muscle cars were the thing back then, where today they're not so much.
Yeah.
So let's see. In the 50s and 60s, I didn't know this about him, but he had a secondary career in music, producing a series of best-selling mood music albums. His first album, Music Lovers Only, still holds the record for longest stay on the Billboard charts, 153 weeks. Now, do you remember any of the songs he sang, or do you remember him as a musical artist?
I know that he always makes good music on his shows, and I know that he was writing some of it, you know what I mean? And that's actually how he got his start in the entertainment industry, I think, is writing music, and moved into other roles from there.
Now, what did you think of him as a musician? Did you think he was good?
Even him playing that, he wasn't, I guess it would be like elevator music today, you know what I mean?
Right, for the time, though, yeah, I mean.
It was easy listening.
For the retirement community, right?
Everybody loved it. I mean, almost everyone of his albums was a bestseller.
Yeah, it says here the first 10 albums sold over 1 million copies each. His span included 20-plus singles, nearly 60 long-play record albums, and over 40 CDs. So while everybody remembers for a comedy in his movies, he had a heck of a music career too, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, a lot of people do other things, and like Frank Zappa. He used to write commercials, jingles, all of the jingles that everybody loved, where Frank Zappa wrote them, and they hated him as an entertainer because he was a hippie and all that stuff about it. They loved his jingles.
Right. He was less known for what they liked him more for, right?
Right, exactly.
Well, here's what about him. His father abandoned the family at a very young age when he was a very young man. When he was 19, his mom passed away of sepsis. His girlfriend's family offered to take him in, but he was very headstrong, and he said he was going to go to the city instead. He went to the city and shared a hotel room with a buddy of his, and his buddy told him of a gig in Reading, Pennsylvania that paid $19 a week. Now, that was big money back then, and he had no money, but the agent that ran the room, he advanced him the bus fare against his pay to get him out there to Reading, Pennsylvania. And that was his first pro gig as a comedian. That he started working the small clubs after that. So that was how he got his start. But I mean,
yeah, they say it was almost Dickinsonian, like the way he was brought up.
now how did you get your start in comedy?
How did I get my start? I was actually, all my life I heard people on in Hollywood. So I went out to Hollywood, and I went up to the William Morris Agency, was the big agency back then. And they had a beautiful girl at the front desk, and I walked in, and I was about 25. I said, I'm here to be discovered. She said, do you have any experience? And I said, you mean like plays in school, things like that? She said, no, like commercials or movies or anything like that. The next thing you know, I was outside the building again going, how'd I get out here?
Yeah. I'm ready to be a star. What do I do, right?
No, I came back here and I got in a play because I got the lead in Barefoot in the Park. I got in a movie for Japan, Japanese public TV, and I spent like 10 years doing plays and theater and things like that. And then I found stand-up comedy. I went down to Stitches one night with Overton was there headlining and
Found a home for yourself, man.
I went back the next night with my girlfriend and got on stage and I had about the killing jokes and like Jackie Gleason in the bar, keeping the bartender laughing.
It's addictive, though. Once you try it, you can't wait to get back up there, you know?
Yeah, you mentioned how hard his life was when he was younger, though. I really think that a lot of comedians, Richard Pryor, for example, their lives were terrible. You almost make you cry if you knew how they were brought up. But that comedy comes from pain. It's from being in that
Oh, yeah,
place
it's how you it's how you get over your pain. You have to laugh about your pain. A lot of comics do. Robin Williams, look at him, yeah.
Exactly.
So let's see. After he worked in the clubs in Pennsylvania, he worked his way up to work in New York nightclubs, where he would insult patrons. He became an insult comic, you know. Now, what do you think about insult comics? Is that something you enjoy or don't enjoy, or?
It reminds me of Dennis Wirth, in comedy battles now.
Oh, the roast battles, yeah.
Yeah, I got in one and I won it, but I don't know. There's something about it. I just wasn't funny. You know?
Yeah, some people like insult comics and some people get offended. It depends. I mean, I'm from Boston. Nothing insults me. I'll talk about anything, but not everybody is, from my neck of the woods, and some people, they don't go for insult comics. It's not their type of thing, which everybody's got a different taste in comedy.
Yeah, I agree. It reminds me of 7th grade where we were all picking on each other.
Picking on each other in grade school, right? That's a good analogy, right? Yeah. Let's see, Jack L. Warner signed him to a $250 a week contract. Well, then he started making movies, Navy Blues, All Throughout the Night, Tramp, 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 Orchestra Wives. I mean, do you remember any of his not-so-popular movies?
I remember a couple. One thing I want to mention is that, because I was thinking about this before as this was coming up, is that Fred Flintstone, I was going, is that his voice? Oh, that's not his voice. But then I realized that, they designed Fred Flintstone after Jackie Gleason. He was actually going after them to get him to stop using him as a
oh, really? Yeah, you sued him? Yeah, Fred Flintstone. Well, yeah, making a character after Jackie. I mean, I can see the resemblance. Fred Flintstone, the hothead, yeah, like Jackie was, sure.
Well, when I was a kid, Fred Flintstone, when it first came out, was on Friday nights. My dad had one of the first color TVs.
Oh, it was prime time cartoon, yeah, like The Simpsons.
The only thing that was on TV that was color was sports and cartoons. And Fred Flintstone came on 9 o'clock Friday night. I had to get permission to stay awake, even though Saturday wasn't a school night. Right. I had just to be able to stay up until 9:30 to watch the show.
Right.
They like I said, his friends talked him out of going after about the Fred Flintstone thing because you don't want to be the guy who killed Fred Flintstone. By then, Fred was pretty popular. Right,
but if they made the character after him, then he thought he was entitled to some royalties. Right, I understand, yeah. Because, Fred Flintstone, he was an insult husband, right? All right, now
I don't know if he wanted royalties so much as he was insulted that it was designed after him.
Sure. Money's everything. That's what he does for a living. It ain't like it's a hobby. If somebody steals your act, you want some money for it. That's for sure, yeah. Now, you mentioned earlier about some of the characters he did, but he was known for his characters Rudy the Repairman, Joe the Bartender, the Poor Soul, Rum Dum, the Bachelor, among others. Now, are you a fan of comedians who do characters? Or
yeah.
What's that?
Because I know for myself, I was never going to be the lead. I got the lead in the Barefoot in the Park as the first play I did, but I was going to be a character actor. I wasn't going to be a star.
All right, so you're a fan of character actors then?
Oh, yeah.
Character comedians, yeah, do characters in the right. Because, they get remembered, some of these characters. Look at Lodka on Taxi, that was one of the most memorable characters of all time.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you know what? What's his name? Radar O'Reilly on MASH. They get so stereotyped that they can't do anything else.
Right. Oh, yeah. Even Andrew Dice Clay, the Dice Man, that wasn't even his routine early on. That was just one of the characters he did, was the Dice Man, and it became so popular, it became his whole act,
Yeah, people thought that was what he was really like. The Dice Man isn't like that. Because his girlfriend loved him when he was doing that. And he was with the same woman for a long time. And,
well, you gotta go. What the people like, that's what you go with, right?
Yeah, it was a character. It was a character that he portrayed. It wasn't who he really was. But,
right.
you know, if you're standing behind him at the bank and he's cashing a check, you might be worried that he's going to make a comment to you. You know? And I mean, I watch him on a lot nowadays and he still plays the character up. But in reality, the guy that's sitting in his living room at home isn't the same guy you see on stage. It's amazing how people think that that's who you are.
Well, he had a fear of flights, too. And I remember a story, they said that, he took a flight. He flew into L.A. to do like some really, before he was popular, like low rolls. But when he was flying in, the airplane had trouble. He had to make an emergency landing in, I think, Houston or something. And he refused to get back on the plane. He went into a hardware store and asked the guy to give him $200 to get to L.A. The guy's like, well, why would anybody give you $200? So he explained his story and who he was. And the guy didn't believe him. And he's like, no, look, I'm in the movie playing down at the theater. Look at the poster, but he wasn't one of the main characters, so he wasn't on the poster. So he's like, I'll tell you what, I'll bring you to the movies, I'll pay for your ticket, you watch and see him in the movie. So he took the guy from the hardware store, they watched the movie, then when he came on screen, the guy believed him. He gave him $200, he got to L.A., then borrowed $200 in L.A. to pay him back. So that was a cool story.
That's a great story.
But let's see, his final performance was opposite Tom Hanks in the movie in 1986, Nothing in Common. Did you happen to see that movie?
I don't know. What was that about?
Tom Hanks, I didn't see it, so I was hoping you did. So,
I don't remember it.
Nothing in Common. I might have seen it and I forgot about it because it was 1986. But who knows what we were doing back then, right? We get some missing years.
Yeah, exactly. 86, I don't know. I might have missed that one.
Well, that was his final performance anyway. But we got a few fan questions. You want to chime in on what the fans got to say?
Sure.
All right, just give me your opinion. I'll tell you what they got to say. Give me your opinion. Rodney Wirth, no relation to me at all, but the honeymoons, you are a blabbermouth. That was already told. That was one of his catchphrases too, right? You are a blabbermouth.
Oh, yeah.
Right to the moon, and he had a lot of catchphrases he was remembered from.
Oh, yeah. It was,
all right, now Mike Delamont.
He had a lot.
What's that?
I said he had a lot.
Yeah, he had such a span career. Yeah.
Joe the Bartender, he pulled these characters from his real life, too. You know, like Joe the Bartender was a guy that never seen when he first started doing stand-up. He was, before he started doing stand-up, that's what he looked like behind the bar at the place that you gave him a chance.
That's what he said. A lot of his characters were guys from New York that he remembered from back in the day.
Yeah, people that he knew. Well, you know what? I try to, when I do my comedy, I do stuff from my real life, and I try to stay pretty close to the truth. Makes it easier to remember, but it's also... That's what I know.
Well, they say the funniest stuff is the real life stuff. It's so much funnier than anything you can make up because it's real life, you know?
There you go.
All right, Mike Delamonica writes in, turning the channel every time I saw his face on TV, overrated. I like the more subtle humor myself. And as I mentioned, you know, I'm from Boston. We're boisterous from Boston. We're insult comics. We don't get offended. But I guess Mike got offended by, you know, how boisterous and outgoing he was, where... You know, not everybody likes. Have you ever been, like, insulted somebody on stage when you were performing comedy?
Have I ever what? Insulted anybody?
Yeah, has anybody ever got upset with some of your material?
Oh, all the time.
All the time, right?
If you offend somebody, you're not doing your job as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, you can't make everybody happy, because everybody's got a different taste.
You don't offend everybody, that's all.
Yeah, everybody's got a different taste in humor, so... All right.
Well, I would say if you're too close to the comedy's going to hurt. And somebody in the room is too close to that joke, you know.
Too close to the subject, right?
You're going to offend that person, but, you know, hopefully they can stick with you to the next joke, you know.
Find one that they like. Yeah, I see. You got to move on, you know. You can't let somebody hold you up.
Well,
all
you know what else too with Jackie Gleason is for a while there, he was doing everything.
Yeah, but I mean, he was really an outgoing where he'd talk about anything, he'd insult you, he'd really take charge of the room, and some people don't like that kind of person, you know. They don't realize it's humor, they take offense and think it's real life, you know.
In his day, he was brash, too. He was like a cutting-edge brash, you know.
Right. All right, Brian Keith, maybe you can explain this one to me, because I don't get it, but maybe you can. You watch The Honeymooners probably more than me. The Honeymooners, one of the greatest comedies ever. A string of polo ponies. I bribe a dus I bribe. Humana. Do you know what he's talking about?
With Brian Keith?
Brian Keith, right. He put in a string of polo ponies. I bribe a dus I bribe. Humana. All right, I thought he broke into some kind of tongue there or something. I didn't understand. I thought maybe you did, but someone will have to Google that one and figure out what Brian's talking about there. All right, but
yeah, maybe somebody will call you and tell you what it is.
We'll have to figure that one. All right, we end off every show with some trivia. I ask you 3 trivia questions about Jackie Gleason, and we'll see how many you can get right. And I'll say most people go 0 for 3. A couple people have gotten 2. Most people get 1 or 0. But if you do get all 3 right, we ship you out a bottle of our sponsor, G Vegas Buffalo Sauce. Do you like buffalo sauce?
Yeah, I do.
You do? All right. So let's see if we can win you some. You ready for your first trivia question?
Okay.
In 2002, who portrayed him in the television biopic about his life?
Who portrayed Jackie Gleason?
Yes. In 2002, they made a biopic about his life. Who was it?
John Goodman.
John Goodman? No, it was Brad Garrett from Everybody Loves Raymond.
Okay, I can see that.
And Brad, he was a tall guy. They had to like redo the set of the Honeymooners that they redid to fit his height. It was like tall doors and tall everything because he was so big. But
exactly, because I don't think Jackie was all that tall.
No, but I mean, Brad was when he portrayed him. All right, number 2. He had a small role in what 1980s popular film as businessman U.S. Bates?
U.S. Bates. Not telling me. How about Smokey and the... No, that's Smokey and the Bear? No, that's not him.
That was obvious when he was in the Smoking Man. He had a small role, okay, not a big role, small role in what 1980s popular film as businessman U.S. Bates?
No idea.
The Toy with Richard Pryor. Do you remember at the beginning of The Toy?
Yeah, I remember The Toy.
He was with the kid walking through the kid was his son walking through the shopping store.
Okay, I remember that.
That was, I know, I was like, I didn't remember it too until I read the answer. I'm like, oh yeah, I do remember that now, man. Things we forgot about Jackie Gleason. All right, let's go with number 3 here. What was his hobby/interest he appeared on talk radio shows about and prompted then-President Richard Nixon to share some classified details with him about?
Oh, I want to say the occult.
You're in the ballpark.
Like that.
What's that?
The occult, things like, afterlife type stuff, or aliens.
Right, you've got it. Paranormal. He was into paranormal and UFOs, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you got that one right. Yeah, 1 out of 3, that ain't bad, so most people get. But I didn't know that. He was into the paranormal and did a lot of radio shows about the paranormal, and he was into UFOs, and Richard Nixon shared some classified information about UFOs with him, so things you didn't know.
He did get to the point where his library was mostly stuff about that,
Right, they mentioned that his library was filled with stuff. All right, so thank you for being on Funny Like a Clown podcast, Bob. But before we go, you being a fan of Jackie Gleason, what would you want other fans to know about him?
He was one of the better actors of his day.
He was the guy back in the day. He was iconic up from his time, absolutely. All right, Bob, we'll catch you on the comedy scene soon, and thanks for being on the show. What's that?
I said thank you very much for having me on the show there.
All right, we'll see you on the comedy scene soon, all right?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Bye-bye. All right, comedian Robert Glancy on I'm falling asleep on you guys here. It's been a long weekend. I just did a big comedy show last weekend. All right, comedian Robert Glancy on Jackie Gleason, and what can you say? Right to the moon with his career, and I mean, just they weren't just good roles. They weren't great roles. They were iconic roles. I mean, in The Hustler playing Minnesota Fats. I mean, Smokey and the Man at Buford T. Justice. These are 2 just iconic roles, and they were generations apart, I mean, The Hustler was the 70s. I mean, the Smokey and the Bandit was the 80s, just a career. 20 years, his show was a #1 ratings in television. I mean, you just have iconic roles like that. People dream of having one, and he had just so many. So he was the legend of his time, the Honeymooners. Who doesn't remember the Honeymooners? I remember Eddie Murphy, he was doing a skit about the Honeymooners even. So it's just a legacy that will live on forever. I want to thank you guys for tuning in, Funny Like a Clown podcast. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, listen to us, and we'll catch you next week, folks, with a new comedian. Good night.